Hello, welcome to the first video of Platform Engineering Meetup. My name is George. Today I am joined by Daniel Bergamin. Daniel is a tech enthusiast, and today we're gonna explore the topic of transforming from software to platform. And Daniel, do you want to say a few words, introduce yourself?
Hey, George. We spoke a little bit about the idea of doing a meetup, and I guess one of the things that came up was the topic of how people might end up getting into platforms. So, looking at me, you can tell I'm pretty young. There's probably not much I can speak on with too much authority, but transitioning from a more software engineering role to a platform role is something that I feel like I've got a little bit to chip on, just because it's been the story of my career for the past 5 or 6 years. So a quick bit of background about me. When I graduated from uni with like a pretty standard comp sci degree, went on to do a role that was a blend of consulting and Java development, specifically related to like Atlassian type products. So Jira, Confluence, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them. And I did that for about 5 or 6 years. And that role was, it was a bit of a mix of everything, like consulting, development, probably a little bit of a taste of infrastructure, just in terms of setting up the applications with some clients, but not so much. And as I got towards the end of that, had a few projects that involved starting to work with, larger scale instances, touching, getting to host Jira at scale, and we were starting to look at things like load balancers, clustered databases, things like that. And it sort of really, I was just really curious about how all of that worked. One of the challenges that's sort of always drawn me throughout my career has been the challenge of scale. I think like even really simple things become really hard when you try and do them a lot. Scaling something, like even problems that sound trivial, I find when you really try and stretch them in some way, they can become quite hard in ways that you usually can't predict. So that was, I guess, what started me on the path to platform, working in a more development type role, and then just starting to, by nature of the role changing, getting a bit more experience, I started to have to think about things like state, think about scaling, think about high availability. And to be honest, I found those a lot more interesting than the sort of standard development work I was doing, going from implementing new features, like adding screens and things, which is all fun and quite interesting. But my mind just started going more and more towards the world of infrastructure and platform. So where did I go from there? I had that interest and desire to get towards platform. So at that point, I did probably the thing that is the hardest, which was changing jobs or switching jobs. It's not really, it can be a bit of a stressful move, and it's not something I think that you take lightly. But at the end of the day, it was what I needed to do to move myself further down the path that I wanted to be on. So I switched to a role that was, I guess, more of a cloud operations role. It wasn't quite a platform per se, as we might understand it here, but it was definitely something along the lines of a cloud engineer. So like working with AWS, maybe DevOps thrown in. So a little bit of platform, working with Jenkins pipelines, trying to unblock developers, add new functionality, things like that, figure out why the tests are breaking when the developers can't work it out. Yeah, so I guess it's sort of gateway platform engineering type work, where you're just kind of solving problems as they come up. So you're not, at that point, I wasn't so much involved in the design of these things or even, really thinking about, even thinking about the objectives as a whole, like apart from the technical design of the stuff we decided to build, there's that even larger question of platform, which is, what do you build? And so while I wasn't there yet, it was just very reactive stuff, which is where I think a lot of people might be when they first go into the platform world. It's the sort of jobs that you can get started with, debugging Jenkins pipelines and things like that. So
When we talk about platform and we use the term platform, what do we mean exactly by that? What is platform?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So what is platform? I think it means different things to a lot of people. And probably if you ask both of us, we'd get different answers. So I'd actually be pretty keen to hear yours after, George. But I guess for me, like platform engineering as a term is really about, I guess it's the team that provides a service for developers. So I think it's, if you go back 10, 20 years, I don't think this term was quite as popular as it is now or quite as common. The well understood terms were probably development and infrastructure. And in that sort of model, you have two teams that are kind of in a little bit of, there's a healthy tension between them. So you have infrastructure, whose job it is to keep things running and keep things stable. And then you have, and I guess infrastructure is more of, you're always maybe a little bit of a cost center. You're not making the company money, but you're stopping the company from losing money, I guess, in infrastructure by being reliable. And on the other side of the fence, you have development. And, you've got that tension there where you're expected to be generating income. And usually the way that you're doing that is by pushing new features. So you've got maybe someone, whether it's a BA or a product manager or a project manager, you've got someone saying, these are the things we need to deliver to bring more money into the company, to attract more customers. Let's make them happen. So you've got developers going, yep, okay, we need to add new things to the product. And then you've got infrastructure on the other side going, well, when we don't add things to the product, nothing breaks. So we don't want to add anything. So you sort of have that inherent tension there. And I think a lot of the time that probably worked out reasonably well for a lot of companies. I think the best results always come when there's people working from both sides. But yeah, I mean, we probably ended up in, you end up in situations where maybe things are not moving as fast as they could be with a bit of cooperation. So I think that's where platform DevOps, that sort of movement comes in. And we then sort of start to look at recently, what if we construct a new sort of team? You're still working with infrastructure like your system administrators would have done before, but we're now taking a different approach. We're trying, I almost think of it like instead of having stability as our number one goal and looking to achieve that by slowing the rate of change or making, the rate of change very measured, I think maybe it's almost more like trying to attach jetpacks to your developers, like sort of give them more power, but also more responsibility, so to keep themselves safe. So platform, I think, it's a different way of, I guess, looking at that problem. The problem is the same one as always. It's how do you ship new features that will bring you customers and make money without impacting your reliability. So, perhaps your older or your more old school model of the problem might be you do that by slowing or heavily controlling the rate of change. And the way to achieve that is to have another group that works in a healthy tension, it's the infrastructure that controls the change, the developers that are pushing for it. Platform is going, all right, why don't we have another team that's built on making change, I guess, just less unsafe. So it's about, and also helping the people that are making the change become responsible and sort of accountable for managing the process of that change through production. So I think the way we do that in platform, we build tools that let developers do more than they could have done before safely. We're all about providing controlled interactions with infrastructure in a safe and self-service manner. And that's, it's a very long answer, but I'll try and...
I think it's very active. I think that's one very important point, which is providing the tooling and creating those abstractions on the different cloud providers. So for example, if a company decides to use AWS, then you can't expect all the developers to know the intricacies of its different product. They want to have a nice interface to be able to interact with those products. Say they want in-memory cache, or they want a load balancer in front of their service. And I like to think of platform as providing, those core components that are decoupled and people can just use them in a plug and play manner. Platform also sometimes governs a lot of the processes and how things should be done. Maybe they have some opinion on the architecture for some standard deployments and things like that. Quite a lot of responsibilities in platform. And you also mentioned the term DevOps. I know this is probably one of the most misused terms in technology. A lot of people have different opinions on what it means, but what does it mean for you? What is DevOps?
Yeah, really good question. I think a lot of people ask me that question when it's sort of like, oh, what do you do? Someone might say, what's your title at work? And I'm a DevOps engineer. So what do you do? I think, and if you ask 10 DevOps engineers from 10 different companies, you would get 10 very different answers. And I think that's, it's really comes down to DevOps being a bit more of a mentality than a position. There are people who are labeled DevOps engineers, and they're usually people who work on things like pipelines. They might be looking at putting together Jenkins things. They might be doing things related to the cloud, things related to environment management, even sort of more like troubleshooting type activities on like operational kind of tasks. But I think the thing that they all have in common is that usually the role is acting as some sort of interface between teams developing software and teams that are responsible for delivering that software to the customers. So usually Dev and Ops, I guess, are those two teams, and your DevOps department is sort of sitting between them. They're usually a team that's kind of in conflict with their own existence. As I said, I think DevOps is it's more of an organizational mentality. So, the true DevOps nirvana is when developers have all the tools that they need to get their job done and deliver their software to customers. And so there's really no one who has the job of, I guess, being that interface, because that gap or barrier doesn't really exist. You might have developers that write tools that interact with infrastructure. You've got developers writing things that work for customers. And at the end of the day, you've got that core concept of whichever team or person is writing a feature, they're responsible for how it's delivered in production and how customers use it. So I think, there's a lot of ways that you can get that done. Pipelines are, quite a popular one. That the whole idea that comes inherent with pipelines, where you're delivering a very consistent artifact and taking it all the way from development through to production, and trying to make sort of your development and local environments even as similar as possible to production, is, I think, the first step to thinking about that. If we compare it to maybe times when developers might have been writing a small piece of code, part of a larger system, and not even being able to start that larger system locally, they're quite disconnected from how the application runs in production. So it's not reasonable at all to expect them to have any sort of accountability.
Just I'm wearing this funny t-shirt today. It's a common developer joke.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like that was really, it's not unreasonable. Like if the tools don't exist, if the company is not investing, or the team has not decided to invest in the sort of tools to let you run good lower level environments that are an accurate representation of production, then it's a bit, you can't really ask someone to be accountable for how their code performs when they unleash it into a completely different environment. So I think, but DevOps to me is about, whether it's the same individual or whether it's the same team, it's just all about moving the responsibility for running code to the same place as the responsibility for writing code. Different organizations, it can look so many different ways, but that's our core problem.
So DevOps is a mentality, totally agree. But SRE is a job title. How do these things relate? Are there any overlaps between the responsibilities that you have to do?
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, and I found my title move more towards the SRE with I guess, I started a new role a few weeks ago and found myself going from a title that was definitely more of like a DevOps specialist to being an SRE now. And, I think, again, like SRE is a term that's been a bit more overloaded as of late. I think from the start, SRE was probably better defined than DevOps, just by virtue of Google publishing the SRE book. Those a bunch of essays that say that quite prescriptively define what a site reliability engineering practice is and what you should be doing if you claim to have a site reliability engineering practice. Unfortunately for Google, and I think a lot of companies just really like the term site reliability engineering. It just sounds pretty sexy, right? So I think a lot of recruiters and companies sort of co-opted the term without doing a lot of the things that were originally defined in the SRE book. Probably, I think a few of the important pillars of SRE is probably the concept of error budgets, which, if you haven't read the SRE essays, I think I highly recommend reading them. They're not that long, they don't take that much time, and I think that they're a good understanding of how Google decides to tackle these problems. But yeah, so I think like these days, if you're looking in the market, SRE and DevOps are really probably quite close together. I'd say SREs probably will be a bit more operational than DevOps engineers, and that they're probably expected to have a slightly better sort of understanding of code. So I think if you're applying for a DevOps engineer job, I think a lot of the time, your expected skill set more revolves around scripting. If you're applying for an SRE role, at least at a lot of the bigger corporations, you'll often go through an interview, the exact same interview, in fact, as a software developer. So, you might be getting questions about algorithms and data structures as an SRE, whereas as a DevOps engineer, you usually might not be expected to have that skill set. So yeah, I guess that's probably the main difference. But in terms of what you're doing at most places, it'll be quite similar.
There is a free version online for the SRE book. We'll put the link in the video description so people can check it out. So how does one become a platform engineer, Daniel? What's your take on that?
I'd love to hear your answer for this after George is the current lead of a platform engineering team. I think you probably have a really good idea about what you're looking for and a really good answer. I guess my answer is going to come from the other side of someone, I'll come at it from the side of being a person looking to switch. So for me, the how was really, I think it was, for me, the answer was changing jobs and moving somewhere that had a team that was a platform team existing. I actually didn't join the role or the company where I got into platform engineering. I didn't actually join it as a platform engineer or a cloud engineer. I joined as a Java developer, which was the same as my previous role. But, I knew when I joined, I knew I was joining somewhere that had a lot more platform work going on. And, within a few months, actually, I find usually that if you show interest in the work that's happening in platform, and a lot of the time, if you are developing at a company that has a strong platform presence, a lot of the time the platform repositories are open and they're more than happy to take pull requests, I think. And in that sense, the step really is just about, the first step for me was find yourself a company with a platform engineering department. If you're not already in one, you probably might need to change, or you might need to take a lot of responsibility on your shoulders to advocate for one to come up. But yeah, when you're in that position, then you just start to look to get involved bit by bit. I think most platform engineers are more than happy to talk to developers. A lot of them will be ex-developers themselves. And through that way, I think, as a DevOps engineer or a platform engineer, some of the best, I think the greatest moments are when you actually have developers coming up and showing a lot of interest in what you're doing, and sort of, instead of saying like, hey, can you do this for me or can you make this change to our infrastructure, when they're saying, hey, how can I use the tools that you built to make the change myself, to put in a PR to make the change myself. And, I think if you're looking to move your role towards building those tools for developer self-service or like working on platforms, that's really the way you do it. Just as much as you can, show interest in it, and don't be, if you're a developer, you're stuck on something waiting for platform, don't just throw your hands up and go, I'm stuck, infrastructure is not helping. As much as you can, just get involved and take things on.
I think one of the reasons why the platform repositories are open and the contributions are very welcome by developers is that because, as I previously said, that the platform team is responsible for providing the core components, and they want developers to be autonomous. So if they want to contribute back to the tooling and to their own infrastructure, that's very welcome. I don't think it's welcome for developers to have the expectation that platform engineers will do the infrastructure for their services. You see a lot of companies shifting towards the mentality of you build it, you own it, you're responsible for your infrastructure, your architecture, your feature code, and all of that, which includes taking care of on-call as well. It's okay for platform to be involved in the early stages and the architecture and advice and provide, consultancy on any questions they might have. And but it's definitely not an expectation that the platform team will actually build the infrastructure for. I guess maybe it depends on the company, but I think we're seeing a shift in developers being more autonomous when it comes to building their infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. I think, so you even if you take that first step of contributing, contributing the PRs that build out your own infrastructure, I think a lot of the time, as you said, platform engineering is usually happy to have developers go that next step. When something's missing from those tools, I think a lot of platform engineers are happy to sit down with the developer that wants extra capabilities to be added and help them contribute back to those core platform repositories and build that functionality in.
Yes,
so that's
the customer is the developer. So as you said, they're more than happy to spend the time and add new functionality, provided that it's not an isolated use case and it fits the greater use case for other teams as well. So you asked me about my opinion on how does one become a platform engineer. I have a few notes here on what I think is the right skill set to become, to get a role towards platform engineering. And I'm just gonna read them out. So it has a few different categories. For example, in architecture, you need to have some architecture skills to build resilient systems. And that also falls under system design, I believe. CI/CD knowledge, if people are not familiar with that, they can look it up on Wikipedia. Testing infrastructure as code, experience with cloud platforms such as AWS. Then one of the core platform offerings is providing logging, monitoring, metrics collection capabilities. So there are a lot of tools around those. Won't get into that. Obviously, experience with Linux. It's a big plus. You see a lot of the infrastructures being built purely on Linux. In fact, I haven't seen any in Windows. Network is a very important one. It's becoming increasingly important. I know that it's not something that software engineers see as in a positive light, and they try to avoid it as much as possible. But it's becoming increasingly popular, especially when you have to debug issues in that span different platforms, or in legacy infrastructure, for example. It's definitely a very desirable skill. So understanding the protocols, understanding load balancers, DNS, best practices in the cloud, all of that is very important. And let's not forget about security. We don't want to see credentials in Git in plain text. We can use something like HashiCorp Vault for secrets management. The way it works is that your application authenticates with it, and you get the token back, you get the secrets back. So your secrets are hidden away. They're not in plain text anywhere. They're not hopefully shown in the logs in plain text either. And then you have security in layers. You have security network in application as well. And then configuration management tools like Ansible. If you want to configure an instance, a node, or server, whatever you want to call it, you need to do that with automation. It's not like you can afford to configure 300 machines by hand. That's not the way it's done anymore. I know there are some cool tricks on opening too many terminals and executing the same commands, but you need to have it in Git, you need to have it in version control. Knowledge of a programming language, I think this is an easy one for people who come from a software background, and also basic understanding of data structures, algorithms, and big O notation. So yeah, in platform, essentially it's a combination of software plus infrastructure skills in one person.
I think, yeah, and I think, as you said, there's, as you can see from that answer, there's like a lot of technologies and things that are involved, and yeah, it's almost like there's just a certain mentality that goes with platform, which is just being really curious about systems, and when you have a problem come up, it's not sort of it's not posting in a chat channel and waiting for someone else to fix it and not being interested in what they did. It's just, yeah, I think pretty much the only way you ever get a knowledge that spans that sort of, spans that width is just having a sort of general interest in a real curiosity around the systems that you're running and how they work. And I think, it sounds like a bit of a daunting list at first. It sounds like there's a lot of things you need to know, but I think you find if you start to, to really just take that curiosity through, when you have a problem, try and either chase it through yourself, or, if you're waiting on someone else to help you out, show interest. If someone from networks is helping you debug a networking problem, don't just take, it's fixed as a sort of answer. I think a lot of people in tech are more than happy to share, maybe not the grumpy old sysadmins that you have in your mind. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think like a lot of people, if you ask them what they did, they're more than happy to sort of show you behind the curtain of their magic tricks. And a lot of people are proud to explain how they debugged and solved something. And, that's knowledge that's only going to help you in the long run. So just, definitely get in that mentality of asking way too many questions.
It's a very important mentality to have in the workplace anyway. And since we are working in teams, I think it's also important to highlight that we need to have some soft skills as well, like being able to work with others, being collaborative, do pair programming, follow the agile ways of working, doing the ceremonies like stand-ups, retrospectives. All of that are things that we see in modern teams nowadays. Being eager to learn, I think it's also very important, because in technology, things are either reinvented every couple of months or years, and you need to modernize your architecture, your infrastructure, and having that mentality in a fast-paced environment is very important. So having open mind to work as well. So for example, you could join a company that doesn't have the latest and greatest technology, and that discourages a lot of people from joining them. But if you think about it, there are some transferable skills that you will gain. For example, if they have lots of traffic, if they have critical uptimes, these are things that you will learn. There are a lot of things that you will learn there, and then bring it as a benefit in your CV and in your next role. So I think it's important to highlight those soft skills as well.
No, yeah, absolutely right. I think like two things you said there that I think are well worth repeating. Like the first one about having some soft skills, and I don't think that means you don't need to be a salesman or anything like that. It's just about just having a an interest in the people that you're working with, and having respect for what they contribute, and occasionally asking them to help you is something that goes a long way in the workplace. And the second one, I think, is, as you said, you don't need to be joining Google or something to get an understanding of platform. There's a lot of companies that might be running what you could call a more outdated stack. But again, the way I think you can really look at that is it's an opportunity with a lot of low-hanging fruit. If you're at a company where you're running older systems and they're behind best practice, as it might be called at the time, it just means there's more opportunities to get involved and help drive improvements. And I actually think that's a skill that not a lot of people have. If you sort of drop someone into an environment like your Google or some company with a very advanced stack already working, then there's to me, maybe there's even somewhat less of, like, you can see how things are done in good practice, but I think you can get a very valuable experience from working somewhere that's has issues with their reliability, they have issues with their delivery, and you really need to be thinking about when you need to just think for yourself about what's important, what's breaking, what's painful, and how do you alleviate that pain both in the short term and in the mid to longer term.
Yes, great answer. I think as people progress into more a senior mentality, they understand that it's not exactly the tools they use, it's about the concepts that they learn. For example, if you go to Google, you won't see Terraform being used, for example, but you will see infrastructure as code, which is the concept behind Terraform. So yeah, very important point that big companies have their own tooling, they have their own processes, and you still get all of these learnings, all of these experiences. So there's a lot of transferable skills that can come out from any platform job that is out there today. So what are some cool open source projects that you recommend people to check out, Daniel? I know we've been talking about a few, but have you found any that you would like to recommend?
Yeah, so I think like getting involved, and I first to prefix this by saying, like, I don't do nearly as much open source as I could. I think I'm one of the people that's guilty of that. The extent of my contributions is usually a fork in PR when I find a problem with. I at least do that, if I'm working with a tool that.
It's more than enough. I mean, some people don't do at all, so don't feel guilty about it.
Yeah, but so if I'm working with a tool that has an issue or a library that we're using, we run into an issue, I'll at least take the time to fork it, try and implement a solution properly in the style of the repository, and then PR that back in. But yeah, so I think if you are maybe professionally, maybe you're not quite in a place where you can get involved in platform, contributing or getting involved in trying to contribute to a few open source projects is probably a really good way to go about starting to shift your career in that direction. There's probably a few good ones that come to mind. I think these days, some of the bigger projects like Kubernetes is probably the biggest one that comes to mind. Trying to contribute there might be a little bit harder because there's just a lot of people that are interested in contributing, and the scale is going up so much, a lot of PRs going in. So the sort of issues that you have room to tackle, perhaps, there's not so much low-hanging fruit lying around. But I would just say, have a look for smaller projects, things that jump to mind. Perhaps you could, let's say you're using Ansible for something and you find that there's not a module that supports what you want to do. Have a look at implementing a module. It's, let's say you're using Terraform, same thing there. You try and do something in Terraform. Have a look at maybe a system with an API that's not so popular, and either look to build your own sort of module for that, or one that's perhaps a little bit smaller and just get contributing to it. A lot of those sort of modular kind of systems have, there are just niche little projects out there. They might only have 2 or 3 maintainers, but they'll be used by hundreds of companies around the world. And yeah, in there lies opportunity. I think there's not much more that you can ask for if you're interviewing a platform engineer and they've written their own Terraform module or something like that. I would say or they're a contributor to a Terraform module. That would be an extremely promising sign.
Definitely. Yes.
Yeah.
It's not a requirement, but it's definitely seen in a positive light. And also on GitHub, there is an Explorer link where you can find new projects and cool new technology. So if people are not aware of it, feel free to check it out. I think this concludes our interview with Daniel. Daniel, what do people watching this video need to do? What do they need to do? They need to leave comments. They need to like the video, maybe subscribe. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I think thanks for the opportunity, George, to have a chat to you about some of these issues, and I guess a little bit about the pathway to platform and what platform and DevOps is at the moment. I think, yeah, I'd love to see more of these from you, to be honest. I think keep going with it, and if you do a few more interviews, get some other people's thoughts around what's going on here. It's a great resource for the community, and a lot of help, I think, for people that are thinking about, if where I was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, having that interest in infrastructure and platform, but not really knowing how to change my career professionally. Videos like this with platform engineers would be super helpful. So no, thanks for doing it.
Nice. Thank you for your time, Daniel. I really appreciate it. And we also have a Slack group where people can join and interact with the community and ask questions. We are growing. We have a few people there already, so I'll post a link in the description so people can get an invite and check it out. I think that's all. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks very much.
This has been useful for our viewers, and we'll try to do a few more of this. If you have any thoughts on interesting topics that you would like to see, or maybe ask Daniel on social media as well, I think he would be more than happy to have a chat about technology.